Look at this, my gold record from that novelty party song. Werewolf for mitzvah, spooky, scary.
Any fictional creature worth its salt typically works on two fronts: as a monster and as a metaphor. Godzilla is emblematic of atomic fear and the institutional failures that exacerbate environmental disasters. Frankenstein's monster functions as the walking embodiment of othering, paternal rejection, and the bolt-necked consequence of Promethean hubris. As for the on-screen salivating snarls of werewolves, they're often used to illustrate a tug-of-war between polite society and primal instincts, where the paper-thin skin of everyday decorum is discarded for the matted fur and fangs of lust. Enter Ginger Snaps, a cult classic lycanthropic delight, and a generational touchstone about sex, gender, suburbia, and the swallowing terror of being a teenager.
I think we should get together.
Oh.
On the cusp of adulthood and stuck in a conformist nightmare, sisters Bridget and Ginger find their ride-or-die fraternal relationship tested to the point of breaking when a werewolf bites Ginger. Directed by horror aficionado John Fawcett and written by Karen Walton, who is candid about her complete lack of interest in disposable teens and slashed tracheas, that innate tension lives and breathes throughout Ginger Snaps in a way that sets it apart from anything of its era. From the opening shot of homogeneous houses bordered by untamed wilderness, there's a fuzzy line between civility and savagery that informs everything that follows. Cue Ginger and Bridget, our heroines who can see beyond the show-home emptiness of their environment and take great joy in ripping down the phony affectations of their surroundings, staging art that shows them impaled on picket fences and left lifeless by the trappings of small-town uniformity. Not since Heathers has Middle American Malaise been illustrated with such sneering disgust. For their sin of standing apart from the superficiality of the world, Bridget and Ginger are minimised and mocked.
What a freak.
Now that's a high school experience I think a lot of folks can relate to, myself included, and it's smartly used to show how systems of control are built to reject originality. Let's look at what happens when these young women show off their authentic selves. Their peers applaud them. It's only when a keeper of the status quo rejects their individuality that the consensus turns from admiration to alienation.
God. I mean, I am completely sickened. Right?
Ginger Snaps against the grain attitude elevates it beyond its rock-solid teen and horror movie moorings and declaratively shuns any cliché you can rest at its feet. The get naked and then die slasher trope, save the girl, get the girl dude heroics, and women destroyed or defined by trauma, you won't find any of that here. Despite being a werewolf movie, none of the actual horror is derived from tooth and claw. The real terror comes from the leering eyes of these boner comedy bros, a try-hard mother making cringing small talk about wadded up period pants, the realization that Ginger isn't Buffy and Bridget isn't Willow, and the closest thing they have to a Giles is a creepily chipper nurse giving them the 101 on the viscosity of menstrual blood.
In 3 to 5 days, you'll find lighter, bright red bleeding. That may turn to a brownish or blackish sludge, which signals the end of the flow.
Okay.
All of that is far more unsettling to these characters than the prospect of turning into a literal monster. Betwixt all the Oscar-worthy resting bitch face and a nu metal soundtrack that sums up my CD wallet from 1999 to 2002, is Ginger Snap's most obvious allegory. Lycanthropy as an analogue to the turbulence of puberty. There's Bridget's almost ritualistic blooding at the hands of the sexually upfront cheerleaders, newfound hair, mood swings, and the urge to pounce on anything with a pulse, Ginger reaching sexual maturity mere seconds before this penetrating encounter.
She's got the curse.
Ew.
None of this is subtle, nor is it trying to be, because A, the whole period as a point of powerful awakening angle worked great for Carrie, and plays just as well here, and B, nothing about these women is coy or obfuscated by pretense.
If I start simping around tampon dispensers and moaning about PMS, just shoot me, okay?
As for the male characters, aside from the profoundly pathetic panic these guys feel when confronted with an assertive member of the opposite sex, and feeling so emasculated by a confident woman that they present with what is essentially a sympathetic period, Ginger Snaps takes the age-old misogynistic father-to-son wisdom about steering clear of strong-willed women because they're nothing but trouble, and runs with it.
Trust me, a girl can only be a slut, bitch, tease, or the virgin next door. We'll just coast on how the world works.
Just as Ridley Scott's Alien plays on the male fear of womanhood by having its men assaulted and impregnated by a yonic nightmare, the young men of Ginger Snaps are seduced, overpowered, used, and destroyed by a woman who has let her id take over after 16 years of the ego and superego running the show.
It feels so good, Bridget. It's like touching yourself.
Tanis MacDonald, Associate Professor at Wilfrid Laurier University and author of what I consider the definitive piece on this film, expands on Ginger Snap's darkly comedic refusal to pander to the horny glare of the frat bro crowd. As MacDonald opines, the simultaneous evocation of incestuous desire, same-sex desire, and interspecific desire suggests a social sexual monkey trap for the viewer who tries to decipher which transgression is most prominent or the most shocking.
We're almost not even related anymore.
Throughout Ginger and Bridget's emotional and physical metamorphosis, norm-challenging taboos are alluded to in intentionally uncomfortable ways. Whether it's the straddling, grinding acts of penetration found in this piercing scene, Ginger trying to seduce her sister away from the constraints of social norms,
She come for the ride. A little scratch. Swap some juice.
or Bridget's consummation of Ginger's newfound carnality.
You want me? You want me? Stop hurting everybody else and take me! Take me!
Everything here seems to consciously and mockingly yell, if you're gonna take these tremendously written characters and objectify them, you're gonna have to really mentally debase yourself to try and make that work. At the time of its release, Ginger Snaps was rightfully celebrated for its immediate thrills, daring subversions, and blatant but appreciable feminist subtext. A quarter century on, it feels more revelatory in its empathy and insight into growing up LGBTQIA+ in a small town.
Out by 16 or dead in the scene, but together forever.
As Noah Berlatsky notes in their retrospective piece for WeAreTheMutants.com, most of the movie is devoted to Bridget and Ginger's efforts to keep Ginger's condition closeted so that she can pass.
What?
No, wait, like, no.
What?
The bullying ignorance of attending adults and dweebs taking a perverse interest in the form and functionality of their reproductive organs echoes the obstacle course of identity and social integration that queer and trans folk are forced to contend with alongside all the other growing pains of youth.
I've got weird hairs. So what? That means I've got hormones, and they may make me butt ugly, but they do not make me a monster.
Ginger's first encounter with a werewolf can be seen as her egg crack moment, a term used to connote the moment someone starts to realise their gender identity doesn't align with the sex they were assigned at birth.
Something's wrong. Like more than you being just female.
Ginger goes through stages of code switching and masking as she fights with this friction before hatching into her authentic self in the final act, which makes the ending so quietly tragic.
You think I want to go back to being nobody?
After demonstrating radical self-acceptance, shunning the norms that restrain her, and coming out to the world, Ginger is told that the real her isn't acceptable.
I'd rather be dead than be what you are.
When given the choice of death or returning to who she was before her transition, she opts for an oblivion of her own choosing rather than regressing back into the shell of an inauthentic lie.
What are you doing?
I'll just take it off. I'm just taking it off.
Stop! No!
It's haunting, compassionate, so far ahead of the curve, and on top of all that, if you don't pick up on any of those additional readings, the whole movie works like gangbusters because it's full of practical werewolf costumes and a gallows humour so dry it'll catch in your throat. So, come for the layered deconstruction of identity and sexuality within a teen horror framework, stay for the rad monster costumes and Catherine Isabel serving the C word for 108 minutes. After the delighted fireworks of festival buzz fizzled down to the squinting embers of its botched theatrical rollout, Ginger Snaps kept its slow burn going as word of mouth, positive press, growing internet culture, and the last hurrah of the video rental market solidified it as a cult classic.
Total hormonal toilet.
Seeing an opportunity to expand on its low-key scares and highbrow smarts, Lionsgate scooped up the distribution rights and set out to produce not one, but 2 sequels.
Okay? I'm gonna get you some help.
With her sister dead and lichen blood surging through her veins, Bridget scrambles to keep the werewolf from the door in a crooked rehabilitation facility. Having already built and then broken Ginger and Bridget's integral but ultimately toxic codependent relationship, Ginger Snaps 2 chooses to continue that complex characterization and delve into the emotional truth of its leads in a way sequels rarely do. If their introduction was about socially conjoined twins pulled apart as their burgeoning individualism altered how they saw themselves within the wider world, this follow-up shows Bridget tapping into her internal resources and strength, but haunted by the part of her she let die.
Remember that game we used to play when we were little? The one where we would make ourselves hold our breath until we passed out? Then you'd always get scared and call Mom, and I'd get in trouble.
As Bridget shoots up a homebrew blend to inhibit her inevitable transformation from woman to wolf, it's abundantly clear that the monster as metaphor has moved past menses and the constructs of sexuality and gender, and onto the exhausting agony of addiction, recovery, and relapse. Injecting a rancid concoction to feel normal and stave off the skin-scratching, feverish shakes, the cold turkey pain of withdrawal, a procession of sober folks who furrow their brows disapprovingly at lived experiences they can't relate to. The narrative parallels between substance use disorder and Bridget trying to hold back her inner animal map flawlessly onto one another without feeling forced, and it's so lovely to have a horror sequel that doesn't just reheat leftovers. Ginger Snaps Unleashed demonstrates real tact and unconditional positive regard for those who feel compelled to self-medicate to suppress trauma, and takes great pains to show why non-judgmental support systems are crucial in cases of addiction and complicated grief.
Either give in or give up. It only dies if you do.
I'm not gonna die.
The frank feminism of the first movie returns as we take up residence in this rehab facility, a place to force out the ills of the world, recover a sense of autonomy, and build emotional bonds with other women who have shared experiential perspectives. So naturally, all of this is immediately ruined by a rogue male werewolf who's stalking Bridget because he feels entitled to her body.
Well, where did it come from? The infinite darkness?
I don't think so, Ghost. More like the suburbs.
And a lecherous warden who sexually exploits his patients, while the powers that be insist that any apprehension around him is just a case of women being oversensitive. The fact that so many of the failing protectors and allies here are women further muddies the waters and shows that this series doesn't just go for the low-hanging fruit, as it bracingly acknowledges that generations of women have been conditioned to accept, internalize, and sometimes enable the worst kinds of men.
Have you ever considered another occupation?
You know what? I am quite happy playing this small but vital role here at the care facility. I think it's because I'm a people person.
That said, one significant flaw in Ginger Snaps Unleashed arises from these bold stabs at moral complexity. In the third act, there's a crucial revelation that hinges on the women falsely implicate men in sex crimes trope that every men's rights dork loves to salivate over, which feels wholly discordant with the series' overall stance. Fortunately, the film rights itself shortly after and concludes with intelligence and intensity, but it's a regrettable blemish nonetheless.
Hey, sleepyhead. It's time.
Oh, and for all of us folks out here laughing at the chuds in their make Lycanthropes straight again baseball caps, great news! The queer coding in Ginger Snaps 2 can't even be called subtext. Bridget spends the whole film surrounding herself with and sleeping beside women to hide from, and then destroy a creepy guy who won't take no for an answer. This leads to two of the greatest moments in horror history. This beautiful exchange.
What's your best case scenario?
Hair everywhere but my eyeballs. Elongation of my spine till my skin splits. And a growing tolerance, maybe even affection for the smell and taste of feces.
And later, a mindfulness exercise ascends to a euphoric group self-love session, ending with Bridget getting hairy palms after getting maybe a bit too in touch with herself. Stuff like this shows that subtlety is overrated, and being proudly and openly transgressive rules. Again, if you're only here for the werewolf part, hooray! But it's the heart and smarts that underpin the horror histrionics that put the pep in my step to make this video, so I can effectively just beg all of us to give Ginger Snaps 1 and 2 their flowers. Because Ginger Snaps Unleashed isn't just a worthy successor, but a crucial counterpart to an outright masterpiece. I briefly mentioned earlier that this was shot concurrently with a third and final chapter to close out the Gingerverse. Can it match the magnificence of the two were-women romps we've already discussed? No, and it's not even close. But don't go away! In the frigid winter of early 1800s Canada, lost sisters Ginger and Bridget hole up in a fortified trading outpost. Unbeknownst to them, their new shelter is locked in an ongoing siege with a pack of werewolves. While these snowy exteriors and the economical use of a reconstructed and period-appropriate fort set this apart from the grungy affectations of what we've seen so far, don't be fooled by the aesthetic 180, as Ginger Snaps Back is a textbook case of a prequel that never makes a case for its own existence.
But I see it is not the first time your mouth has made you trouble, is it?
Canonically and chronologically, it doesn't tie into the other films whatsoever. There's no insight given to the characters we already know and adore, no expository silver bullet for the werewolf curse. So, for all intents and purposes, Ginger Snaps Back is a remake of Ginger Snaps. Same actors and all, with an old-timey filter and folks saying ye instead of you.
Verily I say unto thee, let us not succumb to the temptations of the flesh, but rather remain chaste. The faithful shall kneel on bleeding shins.
Amen.
Ginger and Bridget's dynamic and trajectory haven't changed. There's a roguish local boy who doles out lore and sultry looks before getting snuffed. Ginger's slow transformation within a claustrophobic, chauvinistic environment overseen by Peckerwood hypocrites has just swapped out puberty-ridden teens for Puritans. While it's mechanically and functionally a clone that conflates the novelty of its setting with narrative necessity, there are some new nuts and bolts that have been thrown into the works. Themes of colonialism, New World Puritanism, the subjugation and destruction of Canada's Indigenous peoples, they're elements that sit in the background to lightly texture the wood and weary isolation.
Don't forget to say your prayers, ladies.
These people are f***ed.
The issue is that none of these rich avenues for thematic exploration are interrogated or acknowledged beyond an offhand wave here and there. It's an absolute waste, and in the case of the First Nations characters given short shrift, an all-thumbs mishandling of what probably should have been the thrust of this whole thing. Ginger Snaps and Ginger Snaps Unleashed were both about empowering women and LGBTQIA+ people who have been othered, abused, and disenfranchised. Instead of offering that same compassion and consideration to these Indigenous characters, they are crudely shortchanged and consigned to the rote roles of spirit-walking, vision-questing magical minorities to guide these milk-white heroines to where they need to be. While the two films that preceded this paid swooning homage to their allegorical influences before charting their own course with open-hearted authenticity and honesty, Ginger Snaps Back doesn't fully commit to the genre deconstruction or metaphorical musings that define this series. Ginger Snaps 1 and 2 interpret and recontextualize The Howling, Heathers, The Company of Wolves, Thelma and Louise, and An American Werewolf in London, with their cross-cultural sampling, warping, and pitch shifting. Ginger Snaps Back lifts wholesale from the bloody winter of Ravenous, the hysteria-fueled oppression found in The Crucible, and even Alien 3 with its patriarchal colony torn to shreds when a woman brings a monster into their midst. But it never uses those influences in a transformative or additive way. It just copies them. Okay, so here's an analogy for the music heads out there. If Ginger Snaps is Jay Dilla's Donuts and Ginger Snaps Unleashed is DJ Shadow's Introducing, Ginger Snaps Back is a pretty okay karaoke cover of a song you don't mind that much. If I've said a lot less about this entry than I did the other two, that's because there's not much good or bad to say. Catherine Isabel and Emily Perkins are great because they are these characters, or the ancestors of these characters as it were, and everything hums along until a delightful bloodbath of wolfy limb ripping. Then we fizzle out on a bizarre continuity cock-up that infers the entire Fitzgerald bloodline is now dead or werewolves, and therefore wiped out long before the events of Ginger Snaps and its sequel. Which is a bit like having a prequel to 12 Angry Men that ends with all the jurors being killed during the Alamo.
11 guilty, 1 not guilty.
Ginger Snaps Back isn't an unconscionable upset, but a dithering disappointment. Horror trilogies are tough. For every Sam Raimi Evil Dead trilogy, John Carpenter Apocalypse trilogy, and George Romero trifecta of excellence, there's the increasingly cringe thruples of Hostel, The Lost Boys, or Cube. The fact that Ginger Snaps starts perfectly, pivots to really great, and closes out on a just okay prequel still places it above most attempts at 3-in-a-row frighteners because, diminishing returns aside, you couldn't call any of these films bad.
I think she's pretty.
All you need to do is look at the influence it had on Julia Ducournau's masterful Raw, and to the extent to which Diablo Cody's Jennifer's Body pretty much plagiarized it, to see the legacy this little film that could has carved out for itself.
Wicked.
So here's to you, Ginger Snaps, for being too wonderful for this world, Ginger Snaps Unleashed for being better than we deserved, and Ginger Snaps Back for being the trilogy-topping equivalent of a bunt that nonetheless got us all back to home plate without anyone landing on their face.
Hooray!
May I be dead in the cold, cold ground before they ruin you with a straight-to-streaming remake. A howl at the moon for our Patreon producers Jennifer C, Claire MD, Beckio, Jennifer Fetish, Reed Stoven, CC Sings, George Napper, Arden Hughes, John Hughes, Samantha Hughes, Tara O'Connell, and Nicholas Lair-Revere, and some succulent dog food for all these amazing folks who support us over on Patreon. So what are your favourite werewolf movies, what do you think of Ginger Snaps, and were you like me as of a year ago, where you really liked the original but never got round to the sequels? As always, the best way to support the channel is to leave us a comment down below, and if you're in a position to do so, consider checking out our Patreon at the link in the description below. As always, thank you for watching. Until next time, this is In Frame Out.